The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the number 17. I'd like to start by thanking Kay Hannon. I don't know if she's with us today. I don't see her on here, but for her amazing photos of roses that come to us every month. You get them if you're on the Maori Federation mailing list, so if you're not getting them, you might want to sign up. They're always beautiful. This month's really knocked me out, though. I thought this one is a particular favorite of mine. It works for both Pisces and Aries, just depending on how you look at it. You know, as pink or as like living fire. You know. Anyway. As usual, here we go. Oops. As usual, you can find past sessions on makara.us under the subheading MF Webinars. And there's also a lot of other goodies to be had on this terrific website. So first off, let's catch up with HPB and Colonel Alcott. Last month found them staying with their old friend, the author A.P. Sennett, who wrote Esoteric Buddhism. It's been said that it's neither esoteric or about Buddhism, but nonetheless, it's a great read. Who lived in the northern Indian mountain town of Simla. You may remember that they were picnicking, and HPB had produced the phenomenon of an unearthed cup and saucer. So we'll pick up literally at the very next sentence as they continue with their picnic. If you get a reader.
Okay, let's go to Lynn. Can you read that for us, please?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. After luncheon, HPB did another wonder, which surprised me more than any of the rest. One of the gentlemen said that he was ready to join our society if HPB could give him his diploma. Then and there, duly filled out. This was certainly a large order, but the old lady, nothing daunted, made a sweep of her hand and, pointing to a bush at a little distance, told him to see if he could not find it there. Trees and bushes having often served as letterboxes. Laughingly and in apparent confidence that this test would not be complied with, he walked over to the bush and drew forth a diploma of membership, filled in with his name and that day's date, together with an official letter from himself, which I am quite sure I never wrote, but which was still in my handwriting. This put us all in hilarious spirits, and as HPB was in the vein, there was no telling with what other phenomena she might not have treated us, but for most unexpected and disagreeable contretemps. On our way home, we stopped at a certain place to rest and chat. Two of the gentlemen, the major and the one who had last joined us, strolled away together, and after a half hour returned in a very serious mood. They said that at the time when the cup and saucer were exhumed, they thought the circumstances perfectly convincing, and were prepared to uphold that view against all comers. They had now, however, revisited the spot and made up their minds that by tunneling in from the brow of the hillock, the articles might have been put where they were found.
Okay, she ran into this kind of trouble over and over. People who were just unwilling to believe in the possibility of manifestation, would think of anything in order to find an argument against her process, right? By the way, this, of course, is not the actual certificate, but it's about the same time, in 1875, so it would have looked something like this certificate. So we need another reader, please, to continue with the story.
Helen, can you read that for us, please?
Sure. This being so, they regretted that they could not accept the phenomenon as perfectly satisfactory, and offered HPB the ultimatum of doing another phenomenon under conditions to be dictated by themselves. I leave anyone who is acquainted with HPB, her family, pride, and volcanic temperament, to picture to himself the explosion of wrath that followed this speech. She seemed about to take leave of her senses, and poured out upon the two unfortunate skeptics the thunder of her wrath. And so our pleasant party ended in an angry tempest. For my part, in thinking over all the details of the cup and saucer incident, and with every desire to get at the truth, I cannot regard the theory advanced by the two skeptics as at all valid. Everyone present saw that the cup and saucer were covered over with multitudinous roots, which had to be cut and violently torn away to get at them, and both appeared to be embedded in the soil as though they were fragments of stone. The turf above them was green and disturbed, and if they had been introduced through a tunnel, the disturbance of the surface could not have escaped the eyes of our whole party, who were clustered about the digger while he was at work. However, let it pass for what it is worth. HPB's merit as a public teacher does not depend upon the many phenomena which this marvelous woman produced from time to time for the instruction of such as could profit by them. And certainly it is better to have launched the Eastern doctrine than to have created in the ground a whole tea service of porcelain.
Thank you, Helen. Great. Okay. So we finished last month's webinar with what is arguably the most famous quote from the Secret Doctrine. Matter is the vehicle for the manifestation of soul on this plane of existence, and soul is the vehicle on a higher plane for the manifestation of spirit. And these three are a trinity, synthesized by life, which pervades them all. So, given that as our basis, let's start by rereading verse 9 and then continuing with section A. So if you could just, let's see, a reader would just read the highlight parts and we'll continue.
Michael, can you read that for us, please?
Absolutely. But where was the dogma when the alaya of the universe, soul as the basis of all, anima mundi, was in Paramatha, absolute being and consciousness, which are absolute non-being and unconsciousness, and the great wheel was Anapadaka. The idea of universal life is one of those ancient conceptions which are returning to the human mind in this century as a consequence of its liberation from anthropomorphic theology. Science, it is true, contents itself with tracing or postulating the signs of universal life, and has not yet been bold enough even to whisper, anima mundi. The idea of crystalline life, now familiar to science, would have been scoffed at half a century ago. Botanists are now searching for the nerves of plants, not that they suppose that plants can feel or think as animals do, but because they believe that some structure bearing the same relation functionally to plant life that nerves bear to animal life is necessary to explain vegetable growth and nutrition. It hardly seems possible that science can disguise from itself much longer, by the mere use of terms such as force and energy, the fact that things that have life are living things, whether they be atoms or planets.
Thanks, Michael. Thoughts or questions about this particular section? Anyone? In our time, the popularity of the concept of universal or at least interrelated life in popular culture has given rise to the Gaia theory, which states the Gaia principle proposes that living organisms interact with their inorganic surroundings on Earth to form a synergistic and self-regulating complex system that helps to maintain and perpetuate the conditions for life on the planet. Even exoterically, it isn't that much of a stretch to extend this theory to embrace the interrelation of the entire manifested universe. For the Theosophists, this statement is a very esoteric one and exoteric one, and just part of the basic tenet that all life, seen and unseen, causal and manifest, alaya and paratantra, are infinitely interconnected and are all aspects of the one great universal life. So any thoughts about either this statement or the Gaia theory?
Michael has his hand raised.
Yes, Michael.
Yes, I find it interesting that at the turn of the end of the 19th century into the 20th century, there was an Indian scientist named Bose who was studying plants and their sense response to warmth and sunshine and so forth. And that study has it languished for a long time, but scientists have picked it up again, from what I understand.
Yeah, there seemed to be a real surge at the end of the last century into the metaphysical, not just through theosophy, but in the scientific community. For instance, it was pretty much accepted that ether was an existent substance that just hadn't as yet been measured. But in the 20th century, that was dropped as scientists became almost slaves to their ability to measure. But now we find, as you say, there's a resurgence in interest on causal levels. I think you mentioned.
Yes, and now scientists are calling ether as plasma.
Right. Fine, whatever name, right? Right, whatever name, not a problem. Yeah, and this idea in physics that the observer affects the physics interaction that they're observing, that this has been documented. It's kind of, the jig is up in terms of it being a completely objective reality. And, we look forward to the time when those incarnations come in that can see etheric substance and the etheric body becomes visible, and that will change, pretty much everything. Certainly medicine and with it, basically every science. Yeah.
I was just talking to my wife about how there's been certain things in science recently that have been proving what the ageless wisdom has been teaching all along.
Yeah, I always love it when there's some verification like that. It's very special.
So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Okay, on to the next paragraph. Can we get a reader for this section? This continues with A, and which this is a very obtuse verse if just read on the surface, right? But this part is related specifically to the first half of this verse, which is, but where was the Dhamma when the alaya of the universe, soul as the basis of all anima mundi, was in Paramartha, which, if you remember, Paramartha is the highest state attainable by a conscious being, right? So that is what she's addressing with her commentary right now. So, reader, please.
Okay, Scott, can you read that for us, please? You're self-muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to try and read this. That's on a little phone, so bear with me.
Okay.
But what is the belief of the inner esoteric schools, the reader may ask? What are the doctrines taught on this subject by the esoteric Buddhists. With them, Maya has a double and even a triple meaning. In the Yogacarya system of the contemplative Mahayana school, Maya is both the universal soul, anima mundi, and the self of a progressed adept. He who is strong in the yoga can introduce at will his Maya by means of meditation into the true nature of existence. The Maya has an absolute eternal existence, says Arya Sangha, the rival of Nagarjuna. Something like that. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I can see that you have tiny print. All of your Mayas were Alaya, which is interesting, which is actually the exact opposite.
Oh yes, there it is.
We won't let a little thing like that stop us. I could see how that A and L could look like an M easily.
Yeah, when I pull it out bigger, I can see that. So sorry about that.
Not a problem. But I'm sure all of those reading along, got that. So thoughts or questions? Thank you, Scott. And so great that you could join us. Are you on the courts right now, actually watching the flyby?
No, I'm actually just in the hotel. I'm just lying back.
Oh, good. Okay, thoughts or questions? Interesting point that Alaya can be both the universal soul and, quote, the self of a progressed adept. How could that be? Any thoughts about that? To me, it suggests that the consciousness of the progressed adept becomes one with the universal aspect, and therefore they are able to participate in this field of energy of Alaya. Since it's untenable that Alaya could be in any way associated with a separative individual singularity or state of consciousness. Thoughts or questions? Okay, let's look at the footnote. See, it's right there.
Francis, I have one little thing that might be kind of interest. You know how it was that the individual we call the Tibetan was very close to Master Kuthumi. So when we see Arya Sangha here, that was one of the names of the Tibetan in the early centuries BC in the Buddhist monasteries, and Nagarjuna was the name of KH. So we have them both here together.
How fantastic. We just so happen to have a picture of him here. This is Arya Sangha. So this is an earlier incarnation of DK right here.
That's one of the hypotheses, and it's a pretty strong one.
Wow.
So and I believe that Arya Sangha, well, when I went to this Dalai Lama, the big festivity, what is the name that Kala Chakra, right? That's it. Okay, so that was back up quite a few years ago, but it's said of Arya Sangha that he was particularly able to commune with the Lord Maitreya in the Tushita heaven. And, it's kind of interesting, he numbers himself, he says, among the humblest friends of Lord Maitreya. That's what he says. But interesting that maybe one could trace some of what appears in the books back to that time in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century. Yeah. Anyway, just interesting, I think. And
a footnote on the footnote here. Yes. Any information that ties these disciplines is, so welcome. Could we get someone to read the footnote here? Let me give you context here. This is the footnote on this last sentence. The Alaya has an absolute eternal existence, says Arya Sangha, read DK, and the rival of Nagarjuna interestingly, who is Kudhumi, they were supposedly rivals. That's hard to believe, since one was. We know that DK was a devoted disciple of Kudhumi. So anyway, and here's the footnote related to that. Can we get a reader, please?
Yes. Jeff, can you read that for us? And Jeff also had his hand raised, so.
Oh, great. You want to start with your comments, Jeff, and then?
Oh, well, just a note, in the wording of these things, he's speaking of the nature of being on the one hand, as opposed to and distinguished from the function of identification,
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I mean, it's frustrating for us Westerners reading a lot of these Sanskrit terminologies, and it takes me back in the days when I first read this, and I had this instinctual rejection of any of these Sanskrit terms, and of course, when Bailey was introduced, the riddle was solved, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But this was a wonderful bridging work.
It is, and I think that was it had a lot to do with her purpose. It was as a bridge, and with it, she basically brought to life theosophy. This was because this certainly is her opus magnum. I think that if you were raised or came up through a system that used Sanskrit, that there would be many finer points to these terms than we're able to suss out. I've noticed that just in trying to get to the bottom of some of these terms. And you find that so many of them, according to, for instance, the online Theosophical Glossary, pretty much mean the same thing. And I doubt that is ultimately true. That there are fine shades of meaning that are really beyond what we can do in English. But there you have it. They'll become more familiar to us as we keep coming across them and looking at definitions and trying to integrate them.
Mm-hmm.
But, if you would, please.
Arya Sangha was a pre-Christian adept and founder of a Buddhist esoteric school, though Soma Decoros places him for some reasons of his own in the 7th century AD. There was another Arya Sangha who lived during the first centuries of our era, and the Hungarian scholar most probably confuses the two.
Yeah. Okay.
Hmm.
So, okay. Shall we move on to the next read? Hey, Jeff, since you're right there, why don't you just keep reading? This is a relatively short section.
But where was the Dhamma when the alaya of the universe, soul as the basis of all, anima mundi, was in Paramathartha?
Okay, you can stop right there. That's the section that we're looking at. So now you could go to the to the text.
Okay, go down a bit. It's quite fine. This print. Yep,
Yeah.
I see it. Sorry. The alaya was an absolute eternal existence, says Arasanga, the rival of Narjuna. In one sense it is Padmaha, which is explained in Vishnu Purana as that which is the unevolved cause. It is emphatically called the most imminent, sages Pradhana, original base, which is subtitle Prakriti.
Subtle Prakriti.
Oh, yes, I can see. Yeah, okay. It's very fine for my eyes. Yep.
Okay.
That which is eternal and which at once is or corresponds what is and what is not, or is mere process. Prakriti, however, is eternal and is an incorrect word, and alaya would explain it better, for Prakriti is not the unrecognizable Brahma.
Uncognizable Brahma. Okay, before we get into this, let's take a look at the footnote, which references the phrase uncognizable Brahma. So can we get another reader for that bottom part there?
Martha, can you read that for us, please?
I'm not sure that Martha has a microphone
Yeah,
on her computer.
she did, but
No?
I've got her a couple of times here. Okay, Martha, can you?
Yes, I'm here.
Great.
Okay, so I'm reading the bottom, the indiscrete cause.
Yeah.
The indiscrete cause, which is uniform, and both cause and effect, and which those who are acquainted with first principles call pradhana and prakriti, is the incognizable Brahma who was before all. Vayu Purana, i.e. Brahma, does not put forth evolution itself or create, but only exhibits various aspects of itself, one of which is Prakriti, an aspect of Pradhana.
Okay, thank you, Michael. In order to better understand this footnote and the statement it references, let's take a look at a list of terms that represent supersensuous matter. Let me get over there. Okay, now these are all terms that occurred just in this last reading. And they're arranged from the most materially tenuous at the top to the most dense, as indicated by the painting on the left. So, could we get an intrepid reader for this list of terms? And hopefully it will clear up some of these ideas. And keep in mind, everyone, as you're reading along, that Alaya is the highest, most supersensuous level, and that Prakriti at the bottom is the most material, and yet none of them are dense matter. So, can we get a reader, please?
Okay. Francis, will you be our intrepid reader, please?
Yes. Alaya, the indissoluble, the source of all beings and things, Alaya, the universal soul, has an absolute eternal existence.
Okay.
Mula Prakriti, no?
Go
further? Yes.
Mula Prakriti.
Mula Prakriti, on the plane of Prabhavaya Payaya, unmanifested root nature, undifferentiated cosmic substance in its highest form. It is pre-cosmic root substance, the root principle of the world stuff and all in the world. That aspect of Parabrahman, or space, which underlies all the etherically or materially objective planes or space of universal nature. It is indestructible, eternal, parentless, and abstractly the mother, space itself, and the vehicle, lining, or alter ego of Parabrahman. Okay. Pradhana, undifferentiated cosmic substance, that which is the root of and first origin of Prakriti, nature visible and indivisible. Pradhama is Mula Prakriti in the latter's lower ranges, and thus Pradhana in its lower ranges become Akasha. Philosophically, it is the first appearance of root matter around Brahman. It is spoken of as the cosmic veil of Brahman in the unmanifest or first logos. Akasha, the subtle, sensuous spiritual essence which pervades all space, the ether of the ancients, the reservoir of beings and of beings. Genesis refers to it as the waters of the deep. It is universal and substantial space, and mystically in its highest elements is alaya. Akasha is the nomenon and spiritual substratum of differentiated prakriti.
Svabhavat.
Which is directly causal, the quote of self-existent plastic essence and the root of all things. Prakriti, nature, spiritual and ethereal substances in all of their forms, visible and invisible, its root or parent is Buddha Prakriti, root of Prakriti, and it is to be considered with Vikriti, which signifies change, alteration, or a production or evolution from the Prakriti which precedes it.
Okay, thanks very much, Francis. It's quite brave of you to take on those Sanskrit terms.
I'm still alive and breathing, no problem.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so generally speaking, those terms higher on the list stand in a causal relationship. And in fact, in some cases, we're actually told, the causes to the terms beneath them, or those states of being, states of manifestation. It's totally pointless to try and parse these concepts to too fine a degree. I'm sure you could move to India and find an esoteric school and spend the rest of your life learning the fine points. Especially given the limited information that we have. But it is useful to at least begin to become familiar with the causal hierarchy of the material realm, right? As universal soul, alaya alone on this list stands apart, you could say, from, though connected, to this higher hierarchy of causal substance. It's, as I see it, it belongs more to the second principle of nature, as opposed to the hierarchy of substance, which is the third principle, right? So that's, in that light, hopefully in future, it will get some little more understanding. Okay, onward. Could we get a reader for this, please?
Okay, let's see. Karen, can you read that for us, please?
Okay, it is a mistake of those who know nothing of the universality or the occult doctrines. Oops.
Sorry.
Okay. It is the mistake of those who know nothing of the universality or the occult doctrines from the very cradle of the human races, and especially so of those scholars who regret the very idea of a primordial revelation, to teach that the anima mundi, the one life, or universal soul, was made only by Anaxagoras or during his age. This philosopher brought the teaching forward simply to oppose the two materialistic conceptions on cosmogony and Democritus.
Yeah, on the cosmogony of Democritus.
Yeah, based on his exoteric theory of blindly driven atoms. And Anaxagoras, is that correct?
Yes.
Of Clazomy.
Yeah.
Was not its inventor, but only its propagator, as also was Plato. That which he called mundane intelligence, the nous, the principle that, according to his view, is absolutely separated and free from matter and acts on design, was called motion, the one life, or Jivatma. Ages before the year 500 BC in India, only the Aryan philosophers never endowed the principle, which with them is infinite, with the finite attribute of thinking. Finite self-consciousness, I mean. For how can the absolute attain its otherwise attain it otherwise than as simply an aspect, the highest of which known to us is human consciousness.
Okay, thank you. So any thoughts or questions? We can see in a moment the opposing views of these philosophers. Here they are. Through the quotes that they are well known for. Whereas Democritus tells us nothing exists except atoms and empty space, everything else is opinion. And Anaxagoras reveals a much deeper understanding with appearances are a glimpse of the unseen. So, you know, HPB is continuing her pattern of bringing in, corroborating philosophers of all different times, you know, from German transcendentalists all the way back to ancient Greeks to support what she is putting forth. Okay, so as alluded to, oh yeah, this is a famous quote by Anaxagoras, mind is God and God is mind. So as alluded to by HPB in the above commentary, Anaxagoras was also credited with formulating the concept of nu, or mind. And famously said, mind is God and God is mind. But this mind is not lower mind, not the subject object, but is lower mind, but is rather mahat, or universal mind. The motion described as the great breath in the poem, not the mind, conscious or unconscious, of man. Okay, Eddie, this is a thick, one of those thick passages. Does anybody have any thoughts about this before we move on? She's basically here, she's contrasting these two schools of thought, right? And then underscoring the true nature of motion. Okay. So,
hold. Francis has his hand up.
Yeah, Francis.
So it just brings to mind the consciousness of the atom.
Oh, exactly. Right. With that one phrase, everything changes, right? You're definitely you're definitely not in Democritus land anymore. You know, you're in the theosophical belief that, you know, all is imbued with the one life, and all has at its center the flame, often called the jiva, which is the prodigal son, really, who is, you know, no matter what form is currently expressing his consciousness, he is on a journey back to the absolute. But yes, indeed. Anyone else before we move on? Okay. Let's see, we're still on A. No need to read the verse itself again. Just go ahead with the paragraph highlight. This is a long commentary on this idea of Dhamma and Alaya.
Joe,
Reader, please.
Joe, can you read that for us, please? You're self-muted. There you go.
Sure. This leads the reader naturally to the supreme spirit of Hegel and the German transcendentalists as a contrast that it may be useful to point out. The schools of Schelling and Fichte have diverged widely from the primitive archaic conception of an absolute principle and have mirrored only an aspect of the basic idea of the Vedanta. Even the Absoluter Geist, shadowed forth by von Hartmann in his pessimistic philosophy of the unconscious, while it is perhaps the closest approximation made by a European speculation to the Hindu Advaita
Sounds good to me.
doctrines similarly falls far short of the reality.
Okay. So we're not going to get into German transcendentalism, other than to note that it was a much less developed attempt to understand causal principles than the ancient wisdom teachings. However, as a practical philosophy, much good came from, for instance, Hegel's pen, as you see here. My favorite quote of his is, "The owl of Minerva spreads its wings only with the falling of dusk." I wonder if even he knew all that he was saying with that statement, because it's a very deep philosophical and theosophical statement, where it acknowledges that wisdom only comes into full fruition at the end of a life and age, or even a manvantara. Such, for instance, the seventh roof race is going to finally embody the purpose of that group of 7 races. So Minerva was the Roman Athena, goddess of wisdom, whose token was the owl. And interestingly, of course, the great known attribute of the owl is the ability to see in darkness. Suggests, the idea of an incarnate master or initiate who can see even in this place of darkness. They're also known for their silence. So, well, let's get back to the yes, Michael.
For instance, I have just one short thing to say. It's Advaita Vedanta, and it means non-dualism. Non-dual Vedanta, the non-dual doctrine.
Oh,
so
the
Advaita Vedanta, yeah. Non-dualism.
Oh, that's good to know.
And what's quite interesting, just a little aside, the rays of Germany and of India are the same but reversed.
Yes.
So,
indeed.
4 and 1, 1 and 4, and
yes.
Aries, this universal homogeneity, you might say, the only oneness is the sole sign of both of them. So there's quite a connection between these two countries. I remember reading long ago a book by the name by Zimmer. His name was, and he was a German, of course, and it was The Wonder That Was India, and he spoke as if he were really there, So the connection there is very strong. But the whole purpose of the soul of India, with its first ray soul, is to resolve the evident duality that normal perception presents, especially under the fourth ray, and with humanity being a fourth ray kingdom. So it's all about resolution. Yeah. And okay. I just wanted to throw that.
Well, it would seem to me that it would be really the highest soul ray expression extant. I mean, when we look at what's come through India, that it would be the most closely aligned with shambhalic energy, which of course is first ray. And when you think of the beings like the Master Jupiter, who are rumored to still be incarnate, now in his 2,000 years or something, somewhere in southern India, and all the extraordinary ashrams that work through. It seems to be no accident that first ray would be animating them at these higher levels,
of course, it's war and conquest from one point of view, but when you raise it to the spirit, it is absoluteness, or at least as much of absoluteness as can be understood within a universe. So we owe a lot to India, and although it's fallen into decadence in many ways, it will rise again.
Yeah, I think so. Also, I think a lot of the apparent decadence is a veneer, that's over over other happenings. I think the spirit of India is alive and well. It's just not in the daily news, that's for sure. But thank you for that, Michael. It's interesting too, in terms of that German Indian connection, that during the reign of the Dark Lodge during World War II, that they actually sent a squad of German soldiers to India to try to, because they were very, very interested in the power aspect of occultism, right, and how to tap into that. In fact, they did tap into it a lot, and they actually sent a squad of soldiers there to soldiers, scientists, whatever, to gain access to these teachings. At the beginning, I think it was of World War II. It's really fascinating. It suggests that that reversal, that 1-4, manifesting as 4-1. At that time, they truly were polar opposites. Interesting.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean the potence, the power aspect manifesting through personality. Ooh, what is that?
I'm sorry.
Can somebody suss that out? I don't know.
I'll be careful. It might be my.
Might be you.
It might be.
It's gone now. It's gone now, so no problem.
Okay.
But anyway, back to your original idea that the Advaita or
Advaita, well, I don't know. Advaita is one way it's usually pronounced.
Okay, and that literally means the union
non-dual.
Non-dual. Okay.
Non-dual. In other words, the A is the privative, and the Deva is two. So it means not two-ness.
Not two-ness. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So
Asha has her hand up. Okay, go ahead, please, Asha. You're self-muted. Whoops.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to share a bit of my personal story, as I am Indian. I was born in England because my father was posted, but I lived in India from 3 until 9. And I rejected everything because all the monks and the people that I saw down the street were mostly charlatans. And I just rejected the faith. And then when I moved back to England, I went to an English, and all these Sanskrit terms to me were totally ununderstandable. I was just like, I just put them in this pile of like, and then I went to England, went to Catholic school and had the same experience with Latin, but I found the Catholic faith so being raised that we were divine, and then suddenly that I was a sinner and had to say the Hail Mary just for running down the corridor or something. I became an atheist after that. But now I'm really embracing my own, it's a universal truth, but, this ageless wisdom, I'm able to embrace it now through the way the way Michael says so-and-so was DK and, and Kudhumi. And so thank you for that, for letting me embrace, because it's such a paradox to come from there. I love India, and yet it is so hard for me to live and travel there. I can't explain. I have to almost cocoon myself and put a ring pass knot around me just to travel, because it's a land of contradictions, and yet it has the most sublime. I've never been able to kind of make peace with this country. And I love the Prime Minister, and I have so many things about it, but there's things about it that have been very, very hard to integrate. But I'm, understanding more of the religion that I am, I was raised in, having rejected it, to, through these teachings. So thank you. I'm going full loop, but higher up the spiral.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, thanks for sharing your story. And this is one of the particular strengths of HPV is that she does relate it outwardly to these various disciplines. It's something we don't get much in DK. But DK is just, the pure truth and light. But, it's very useful, I think, to have this teaching. Interesting to me that, you went to the other first-ray soul country with England, right?
Yes. My father was so attracted to London, and he used to work in the Parliament building with Nehru. And when the Chinese premier came in the 60s, before China broke war with India, and Nehru actually died from the grief of that. And my dad was then posted to go to China, and he just left and went back to England. He was in grief too. And I remember as a child listening to the radio. I didn't know what was going on, but there was war. I could tell something was, they were talking about the armed forces. I must have been like 6 or 7 years old or something.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
And here I am in New Jersey learning about Hinduism and some of the things now through this webinar here.
Yes, that's something. So it's, you found your way to it. That's great.
Yes. Yeah.
Would you mind reading this for us, since you're on point there?
Yeah. I lost
right
you.
where it starts according to Hegel.
Hold on, I've lost the screen. Okay, got it back. Just the highlighted parts.
Just the starting at according to Hegel, not the verse itself. We're still looking at the commentary on Dhamma, Laya, and Paramartha.
Well, when you say those words, I don't know. It's my limitation. I may be ADHD, but it goes into this part of those words. Even now.
Join the club, and it will get better.
Yeah, something percolates, though. Something percolates, and something happens, and that's all. According to Hegel, the unconscious would never have undertaken the vast and laborious task of evolving the universe, except in the hope of attaining clear self-consciousness. In this connection, it is to be borne in mind that in designating spirit, which the European pantheists use as equivalent to Parabrahma, as unconscious, they do not attach to that expression of spirit, one employed in the absence of a better, to symbolize a profound mystery, the connotation it usually bears.
Thank you. Okay, so thoughts or questions about this? I think Hegel's statement, the unconscious would never have undertaken the vast and laborious task of evolving the universe except in the hope of attaining clear self-consciousness, reveals developed intuition on his part. But, it has its limitations, equating the unconscious, a state of human unconsciousness with the absolute shows a complete lack of cosmic perspective, which in fairness to Hegel has only ever come to us from the highest initiates. I mean, these transcendentalists were working from developing a philosophy, whereas what they were trying to grapple with had been stated by the highest initiates thousands of years ago for instance, through the, in all those source places for the ancient wisdom teachings, Egyptian and Hindu, and even Greek thought. Right? So, any thoughts about this before we move on? Okay. Again, bringing in other schools of thought to give us a contrast between, for instance, European pantheists and Parabrahma. Right? Okay. Could we get a reader for this section, please?
Sure. Michael, Stacy, can you read that for us? You're self-muted. There you
Here
go.
we go.
Thank you.
The absolute consciousness, they tell us, behind phenomena, which is only termed unconsciousness in the absence of any element of personality, transcends human conception. Man, unable to form one concept except in terms of empirical phenomena, is powerless from the very constitution of his being to raise the veil that shrouds the majesty of the Absolute. Only the liberated spirit is able to faintly realize the nature of the source whence it sprung, and whither it must eventually return. As the highest Diane Chohan, however, can but bow in ignorance before the awful mystery of absolute being, and since, even in that culmination of conscious existence, the merging of the individual in the universal consciousness, to use a phrase of Fichte's, the finite cannot conceive the infinite, nor can it apply to its own standard of mental experiences. How can it be said that the unconscious in the absolute can have even an instinctive impulse or hope of attaining clear self-consciousness? See Schwegler's Handbook of the History of Philosophy in Sterling's translation, page 28.
Yeah, so, we all go to our libraries and grab Schwegler's little handbook. I think HPB finally comes into her own. It's really a brilliant passage because it underscores the basic difference between European philosophy and the ancient wisdom teachings, summed up in the phrase, the finite cannot conceive the infinite. Thoughts or questions about this? We can see how the German transcendentalists forwarded the Greek idea of new through a projection of human states of conscious unconsciousness onto the divine. It's like a projection, an idea which HPB and the ancient wisdom teachings refute, absolutely. As HPB says, man is powerless from the very constitution of his being to raise the veil that shrouds the mastery of the majesty of the Absolute. To raise the veil that shrouds the majesty of the Absolute. You can feel the hand of the master here overshadowing her with that statement. Any thoughts about this?
Michael, please go ahead.
The comment about the finite cannot conceive the infinite, that comes across to me as, well, no kidding, or duh. For someone to say, well, I may be finite, but I really know what infinite is to me just really out there.
A non sequitur. You can't get there from here. You can't get, yeah. Right. Yes, indeed. It's actually a fundamental difference, a fundamental tenet of the ancient wisdom teachings. And we've been reading about it now, since we started the Secret Doctrine. The difference between the absolute and even the highest levels of manifested consciousness, that there's a how do you say it? Well, what you just said, the finite cannot comprehend, or know, or become the absolute. Until that great day be with us, when all is brought back into Manvantara and unity is experienced once again. But even in the lesser Manvantaras, such as a planetary Manvantara, or that occurs between one chain and the next. Things are just held in stasis until the new manifestation comes forth. So it's really at what's called a Maha Manvantara, the dissolution of the entire universe, where this return to unity occurs. Okay.
Jeff has his hand up. Please go ahead, Jeff. You're self-muted. There you go.
Sorry. Yeah, well, this is the nature of the paradoxes, isn't it? And of course, the concrete mind cannot do this, but the abstract mind can entertain this as a definite possibility, And so therefore what we're calling this paradox is the argument that exists between these two functions of mind. So, this is not an impossible task. I mean, it's inevitable as such when we start to go down into that realm of the triadal thinking, So the resolution is assured because we are that. That's what this paragraph is saying, We cannot be anything but. And, and there's such a wonderful contrast being given here, how these earlier Western philosophers were really indoctrinated by this idea of, or the thought form of God, and its inhibiting factor, and it was such, the emphasis had been on faith, of course, whereas, we don't see that. The Eastern mind is quite liberated from these things as such, and they have the entire structure before them. It's so refreshing to us, of course. One's like a prison, really, in some ways, and the other is liberating.
Yes. You make a good point, that you could say the war between the concrete and the abstract mind, that the abstract mind is in the direction of the absolute, or to the infinite, as compared to the finite. Because it points to the direction of being to the formless realms, though there actually is just higher and higher and higher levels of form, that is inhabited by first the singularity and then group consciousness and then ever expansive levels of singularities. So yes, thanks for that. Yeah.
Okay, and then Francis has his hand up, but first Jeremy says, or asks, does unconsciousness ever end while in Manvantara, even for a cosmic logos?
Well, I'm uncomfortable with the term unconsciousness as a term relating to what you would call super consciousness, because it to me it's a psychological term that suggests that which is not conscious in the mental processes, right? And though it is often used, certainly by the German transcendentalists, as being an attribute of, for instance, of absolute being, and but I'll ask you a question one more time. With that caveat, let me hear again, if you would, please. Could you read it again?
Oh, sorry. I was reading it. I was just muted. Does unconsciousness ever end while in Manvantara, even for cosmic logos?
Ever end. Okay, I'm going to interpret that as meaning, does lack of consciousness ever end? Is that what you mean? Does does a lesser understanding ever end?
Jeremy, we're getting some very bad feedback, but can you talk to Francis about that?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So this question is something that I'm really enjoying thinking about for some reason. And it has to do with the experience, I don't know what else to call it, of absolute reality kind of being ever receding or ever able to experience.
Yeah.
And so there's always some aspect that we're unconscious of, and it seems that may be true for higher beings and the divine kingdom and spiritual kingdom, and I'm just it's just something that kind of is a paradox for my mind, and I just thought I'd ask, see what
I see. Yeah, I would just change the wording from unconscious to aware. Is there, is even this highest, like a solar logos, are there still levels that they are unaware of or haven't come to include in their consciousness? While in times of Manvantaric times or time of manifestation, and I would say yes. That there's the whole process undertaken during a Manvantara is expansion towards, but not unity with, that which the Absolute holds in its purity, which is the one life aspect. So it's ever expansion towards the one life. And you go through progressive stages, but even at such a high level as, you could say, the entity that informs a galaxy is still in a process of expansion, even though their reality would be something that we couldn't even begin to fathom. So, but I think the term unconscious is a little bit problematic. In fact, HPB goes to some length to point out the difference between this transcendentalist idea of equating unconsciousness with the absolute, and what the ancient wisdom teachings teach. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I saw that, and actually it was in this passage that kind of brought this, is the reason that I brought it up, because even the term here, and I do understand the distinction she's making here, but thank you for your thoughts on that. It's helpful.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah.
And then Francis. Oh, I'm sorry, Francis.
Whatever.
Go ahead, Michael.
Okay, well, just a thought. This is difficult to express, but to me, the universal logos, which derives from absolute infinitude in a post-prolaic state, this universal logos is a finitude. And I distinguish between, in other words, it's a number one. It's a finitude. It's bounded. It's bounded by its own self-perception. Now, it seems the ratio is always the same. Absolute infinitude to one. Always the same. No matter how vast we may look at a universal logos, it is still, it's what I call an absolute infinitesimal, really, when compared with what I call the absolute deity, which has unbounded self-consciousness. Now, if I can just explain this without taking a lot of time here, it seems to me that the unconsciousness of the absoluteness is, in a way, infinitely beyond the post-prolaic absolute deity. Somehow this post-prolaic absolute deity has absolute infinity as its object of self-consciousness. But within the absolute itself, and you can't use words like that, of course, it seems to me that even consciousness or any predicate of any kind is not allowed. In other words, there's such a, I call it the infinitessence, okay, I coined a word. There is such a homogeneity, such an infinite intensity of being, that the arising of anything we call intelligence, consciousness, or anything of that nature is just not happening. And as a matter of fact, nothing's happening. No thing is happening. Okay. So somehow out of that absoluteness of which one can say nothing that is true, really, arises this absolute deity, which is a pre-universal and post-prolaic. And when it examines itself or looks within itself, it finds absolute, boundless, absolute infinitude. And out of that, in methods that, who can say, I've got some ideas, but, won't get into it, comes that finitude that we call a universe forever. Just a recombination of that which is seen of itself by the absolute deity. And out of that comes one universe after another, in a way out of all relation with every other universes. In other words, it doesn't help that a universe has some kind of evolution or progression. Otherwise, it cannot progress. No universe can progress beyond its archetype. There's a lot to be said here, but basically I want to say that when you use a word like unconscious, it has a bad kind of connotation, and it's a bit like no number. But to me, it's an absolutely it's the ultimate intensification of beingness in which no action whatsoever occurs other than being itself. Okay, thank you for that, indulging me on that point, and I'll just lie low here.
No, very clarifying. Thank you. Yeah. Well, the word unconscious can be seen in two ways. That which stands all together outside of that realm which expresses itself as consciousness, which is what you're talking about. It's altogether other than that realm of consciousness, and that's in a causal relationship to it. Or the usual sense of the word, which is that which is below the level of conscious mind, right? Which is the way it's used, for instance, by the transcendentalists. And so it's like so often it's necessary in speaking of these truths that you have to, in a sense, give new meaning to these English words, because they, in their original meaning, they don't express these high realities, Yeah. Thank you, Michael. That was really some good clarity on this idea of the absolute.
Thank you.
Okay.
So Francis still has his hand up, and Antoinette says, Michael, would the bow in ignorance then stretch to the finite? Or the bow in ignorance.
Well, the bow of ignorance. Whoa, I'm going to have trouble maybe identifying what the bow is. You mean something targeting a specificity, the bow of ignorance? What do we mean by that? I'm so sorry, Antoinette. That,
no, Michael, it is as the highest Dzyan Chohan, however, can but bow in ignorance before the
yes. Oh, okay, got it.
Yes.
Yeah, well, look, we tiny little emanations who are already the absolute deity and are already and forever the absoluteness itself, in our present emanated condition, can do nothing else but bow in ignorance even before a master of the wisdom. So when you think about the deity of the entire universe, that's about what we can do. And by the way, we can retract along our emanative stream and get right back to where we already are. So anyway, yes, every morning I bow in ignorance before the vast infinitude of relations of which I know nothing in my present encapsulated state. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
A monad expressing itself as a personality, right?
That's what we are. Yeah, exactly. It's well said. Yeah.
Okay.
And then Francis.
Yes, Francis.
Oh, yeah, just very quickly, a personal anecdote I think relates to what we're speaking of here. And we were speaking of finite cannot conceive the infinite. And we were speaking of India and the concept of Advaita, beyond the duality. In numerous trips to and through India, I remember a teaching once given and speaking of these concepts. The simple wording was to give up the need to understand. And at first I found that problematic, but then in embracing it, I found that it was quite liberating, that giving up the need allowed my own personal experience to further open the door, shall we say, and to embrace the further oneness of the path. But just a personal anecdote about giving up need and bowing in humble adoration of the absolute.
Yeah, one could see how need could act as an impediment to the truth. Thank you for that, Francis. Yes. Okay, let's move on to the next reading here. Can we get a reader for this short segment? You could just read the bottom part.
Karen, can you read that for us, please?
A Vedantin would never admit this Hegelian idea that the occultist would say that it applies perfectly to the awakened Mahat, the universal mind, already projected into the phenomenal world as the first aspect of the changeless absolute, but never to the latter. Spirit and matter, or Purusha and Prakriti, are but the two primeval aspects of the one and secondless we are all taught.
Okay. Thoughts? Questions? When HPB says that it applies perfectly to the awakened Mahat, she is referring to the merging of the individual in the universal consciousness, but cautions that this is not the same as becoming one with the absolute, which does not occur until pralaya, called by Theosophists the day be with us. HPB's final comment on section A is the matter-moving nu, the animating soul. Let's see, yes. Actually, let's get a reader for this instead of me reading it.
Okay. Jeff, can you read that for us, please? You're self-muted.
There you go. The matter moving nous, the animating soul, immanent in every atom, manifested in man, latent in the stone, has different degrees of power. And this pantheistic idea of a general spirit soul pervading all nature is the oldest of all philosophical notions. Nor was the Archeus a discovery of Paracelsus, nor of his pupil Van Helmont, for it is again the same Archeus or Father Ether, the manifested basis and source of the innumerable phenomena of life, localized. The whole series of the numberless speculations of this kind are but variations on this theme, the keynote of which was struck in this primeval revelation, primordial substance. See part 2.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a look at the Theosophical Glossary's definition of, let's see, where are we here? Again, I hit the wrong button again. That always messes me up. I only have one job, right? Just to hit this one button, but I mess that up once in a while. Here we go. Archaeus. So this is a definition of this seed thought of this paragraph. If we could get a reader for this.
Francis, can you read that for us, please? I just muted you. There, you're self-muted. There you go. Thank you.
Archaeus, from Greek archaeos, original ancient, used by Paracelsus and others after him to denote the unitary cosmic or human spiritual vital force or essence. It is one aspect of the anima mundi and therefore the source of all astrophysical phenomena, whether as energy or substance, also called father ether. From another standpoint, Archaeus is one phase of Fohat manifesting as energy on lower planes of the universe. Indeed, even in a spiritual sense, Archaeus in its highest portions may be called Fohat itself, as it is a combination of intelligent energy and original substance working as soul and vehicle.
Okay, so yeah, this is Paracelsus's contribution, one of his main ideas and thoughts. Any comments on this before we move forward? Okay.
Francis,
yes,
one
Michael.
little thing. When HBB is quoting Paracelsus, she may be quoting herself. That's all I'll say. That's all I'll say.
Even looks a little like her. Look there.
Well, that's the story.
Rounded.
What do you say? A cult rumor has it, you know. Anyway, something.
That's really kind of changes one's priorities in terms of reading Paracelsus, huh? Yeah. Okay. Well, with that thought, shall we move on to the next? We have now made it to the B section of her commentary. So if we could get a reader for this.
Helen, can you read that for us, please?
I'll have a go. The term Anupuddaka, parentless or without progenitors, is a mystical designation having several meanings in the philosophy. By this name, celestial beings, the Dhyan Chohans or Dhyani Buddhas, are generally meant. But as these correspond mystically to the human Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas known as the Manushi or human Buddhas, the latter are also designated Anupuddaka. Once that their whole personality is merged in their compound 6th and 7th principles or Atma Buddha, and that they have become the diamond-souled Vajrasattvas. The full Mahatmas, how is it?
That's right, it's Vajrasattva.
Vajrasattvas, the full Mahatmas. The concealed Lord, sung by Dagpo, the one merged with the Absolute, can have no parents since he is self-existent and one with the universal spirit, Svayambhu, I don't know how to say that.
It's Svabhavat.
The Svabhavat in the highest aspect. The mystery in the hierarchy of the Anupuddaka is great. its apex being the universal spirit soul, and the lower rung, the Manushi Buddha. And even every soul-endowed man is an Anupuddaka in a latent state. Hence, when speaking of the universe in its formless, eternal, or absolute condition, before it was fashioned by the builders, the expression, the universe was Anupuddaka. Oh, I see. Yeah, hence the expression, the universe was Anupuddaka.
There you go.
Primordial substance. Yeah.
Right. So the takeaway here is that Anupuddaka means parentless or without progenitors, and that it can relate on many levels, including, of course, the highest levels that you can conceive, all the way down to incarnate Buddhis who have, like Manushi Buddhas, who can, who are working from that spiritual recognition within themselves, which is itself parentless. I personally believe that this is the meaning behind, for instance, the Virgin Mother, right? That it's an identification with that which is parentless that makes this a virgin birth, because it's not about physical procreation. So, any thoughts about this? So, a human being born of parents can eventually attain the state of Anupuddaka, or parentlessness, through identification with the one life. This stage of consciousness is called Atma Buddhi and can be described theosophically as recognizing, I was going to say as becoming one with the monad, but I think that even once one is triadally conscious, that there's some of this Anupuddaka that comes into one's awareness. Here's a list of those great beings that manifest the state of Anupuddaka. I just took it straight from what we just read. It's useful to keep in mind the difference between scholarship, which is what we're doing, and awareness. No amount of knowledge about this subject equates to these actual states of consciousness, right? For, indeed they represent the final goal of human consciousness, to become Anupuddaka. Nevertheless, here we have this list. Anupuddaka, parentless, Dhyan Chohans, Dhyani Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Manushi Buddhas, Vajrasattva's, which is translated as diamond souled, Mahatmas, the concealed Lord, Sangbai Dangpo, the one merged with the absolute, self-existent, Svayambhu, Svabhava, universal spirit soul. All of those were referenced in this last paragraph. Okay, let's take a look at this. The first footnote on from this paragraph, which refers to the term Vajra-sattvas. Can we get a reader, please?
Joe, you're self-muted. Would you like to try that for us, please? Okay, you're self-muted. There you go.
There you go. Yeah. Vajra, diamond holder. In Tibetan, Dorja Sempa, Sempa meaning the soul. Its adamantine quality referring to its indestructibility in the hereafter. The explanation with regard to the Anupuddaka given in the Kala Chakra, the first in the Gayu, division of the Kanjur, is half esoteric. It has misled the Orientalists into erroneous speculations with respect to the Dhyani Buddhas and their earthly correspondents. The Manushi Buddhas, the real tenet is hinted at in the subsequent volume, See the Mystery About Buddha, and will be more fully explained in its proper place.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. So it's hard not to equate this Vajra to the jewel in the heart of the egoic lotus, in Theosophical discipline. The monadic presence within the central petals, right, as being Om Mani Padme Hum, the jewel in the heart of the lotus, the adamantine jewel. I find brilliant the phrase adamantine quality, referring to its indestructibility in the hereafter. Okay, let's look at the next footnote, which relates to the passage about universal spirit, or Svayambhu. Can we get a reader for this, please?
Asha, can you read that for us, please? You're unmuted. You should be able to talk. Oh, I think she wasn't there. Okay. Jeff, can you read that for us? You're self-muted. There you go.
To quote Hegel again, who with Schelling practically accepted the pantheistic conception of periodical avatars, special incarnations of the world spirit in man, as even in the case of all great religious reformers, the essence of man is spirit. Only by stripping himself of his finiteness and surrendering himself to pure self-consciousness does he attain the truth. Christ-man, as man in whom the unity of God-man identity of the individual with the universal consciousness, as taught by the Vedantins and some Advaitas, appeared, has in his death and history generally himself presented the eternal history of spirit, a history which every man has to accomplish in himself in order to exist as spirit.
Yeah, this comes from the Philosophy of History by Sebre. It's an English translation. There he is. Thoughts or questions? Now we can see that one of HPB's methods is to contrast the ancient wisdom to teachings of known philosophers, both contemporary and ancient. And in order to heighten our understanding, this contributes to the Secret Doctrine's reputation as a scholarly work. DK, of course, felt no need to use this method, which is one of the main differences between the two authors. Though we're told that he was one of the masters that worked with HPB in her Secret Doctrine. Well, dear friends, this brings us to the end of our analysis of the first of 7 stanzas of Dzyan. But before we move on, let's consider how its 9 verses unfold, with the goal of gaining some synthetic understanding of this great stanza that we spent the last many months taking a look at. Let's start by reading the stanza. And Michael Robbins, could I ask you to read these 9 verses? You still with us?
Yes, I am. How can I help it? Okay. All right. Now, you want me to read the 9? Did you say?
Yeah, read the 9. The idea here is to get, there's such a long time between our consideration of each verse that if we could get some sense of how they all belong.
Continuity, yeah.
Yeah, the continuity, indeed.
Yeah, I sure get it. Okay. Okay, here we go. Number 1. The eternal parent, wrapped in her ever invisible robes, had slumbered once again for 7 eternities. 2. Time was not, for it lay asleep in the infinite bosom of duration. 3. Universal mind was not, for there were no ahi to contain it. 4. The 7 ways to bliss were not, the great causes of misery were not, for there was no one to produce and get ensnared by them. 5. Darkness alone filled the boundless all, for Father, Mother, and Son were once more one, and the Son had not awakened yet for the new wheel and his pilgrimage thereon. 6. The 7 sublime lords and the 7 truths had ceased to be, and the universe, the sun of necessity, was immersed in paranishpana, to be outbreathed by that which is, and yet is not. Naught was. 7. The causes of existence had been done away with, the visible that was, and the invisible that is, rested in eternal non-being, the one being. 8. Alone, the one form of existence stretched boundless, infinite, causeless, in dreamless sleep, and life pulsated unconscious in universal space throughout that all presence which is sensed by the opened eye of the Dangma. 9. But where was the Dangma when the Maya of the universe was Paramartha and the great wheel was Anupuddaka? Secret Doctrine 127.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
The only correction was, as Scott, it's, but where was the Dhamma when the Alaya of the universe was?
Oh, there it is. Ah, yeah, thank you.
It must be. I've got to change my font or something. I noticed people are having trouble with this. I think Martha was telling me that it was a hard to read font, and she knows about these things. So I need to.
Okay.
To
and
change.
what did Paramartha tell you?
The higher Martha. That's the one I try to interact with. Yes, that's great, Michael. That's great. I think you may have started something. You may have started something. Okay. So, what theme or themes run through the stanza? What point in the cycles of pralaya, involution, evolution, and dissolution is represented here? What ideas are expressed that ties them together? What can we say that unifies these 9 verses? Any thoughts about this? Any questions? Well, verses 2 through 7, which is a lot of them, right? At least 1, 8, and 9. Verses 2 through 7 list what was not, right? In fact, we only have 2 positive statements, verses 1 and 8, which attempt to describe the absolute. The entire stanza could be summed up by the last 2 words of verse 6, not was. A related theme is potentiality. For in this negative listing, we come to find out what will be. There will be time, universal mind, causes of existence, 7 ways to bliss. There will also be great causes of misery and that which produces them. There will be a father, mother, and son who will set forth on that great pilgrimage of becoming. There will be 7 sublime lords, 7 truths, and the sun of necessity. And all of this will be outbreathed by the boundless, infinite source of all. At the end of the proem, HPB tells us, as by way of introduction, that the first stanza describes the state of the one, all during Pralaya, before the first flutter of reawakening manifestation. A moment's thought shows that such a state can only be symbolized. To describe it is impossible, nor can it be symbolized except in negatives. For since it is the state of absoluteness per se, it can possess none of those specific attributes which serve to describe objects in positive terms. Hence, that state can only be suggested by the negatives of all those most abstract attributes which man feel rather than conceive as the remotest limits attainable by their power of conception. So, we'll be bidding adieu to stanza 1. Of course, there's actually nothing to bid adieu to, but nonetheless, any thoughts, final thoughts, parting observations about this extraordinary section of the Secret Doctrine? Kind of builds the foundation for all that is to come and will be continually referenced, of course, throughout. Anyone? Okay. Well, you know what? I think rather than moving into the next stanza, we're at about 1:45 here, and it seems somehow anticlimactic to take on this great new stanza here in these last moments. So I think if there are no final thoughts, we'll call it a day, a night, or a morning, right, depending on where you are in the world. It's always my great pleasure to be with you on these at these webinars, and I believe we're right on schedule for next month. BL or Joe, do you have a date for us?
I do have a date. The 21st, which would be the 3rd, is actually Easter Sunday.
Right.
And so we have it scheduled for the 4th Sunday,
Oh.
the 28th.
My goodness, okay. I'll be leaving very soon after for the conference. That works for me, though.
Right. So anyway, that's
where we have it. Okay.
That's where we have it. So.
Okay, great. For those of you who can be with us next month, that would be terrific. Your presence is much appreciated. Michael, could I ask you to say a few words about this imminent event, which is going to be occurring on Wednesday? It's the start of a great new cycle in a new year.
Are you speaking to me? Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
You mean our equinox, the start of the spiritual year? Yes. Well,
and
you know,
moon.
Yes, within 4 hours of each other. Right. I'll simply say that, you know, according to the cycles, sometimes these great events do occur very near each other, and the power is, of course, multiplied. Now, Tuya and I have planned quite a few presentations during this time, and I'll be leading a pre-full moon webinar. I think it's on the 19th, usually at 8 o'clock GMT. And then I think I don't have it in front of me right here, but Probably BL and Joe have that. And if I go wandering and looking for it, I'm afraid I'm going to, take away from immediate response. So I will just say that we have, first, of course, comes the equinox, which is one of the 4 major points of the cross of the year. And the hierarchy honors these points, and we should be there as well for the change of energy. But within 4 hours, this intense resurrection, you might say, because the real moment of Easter is the Easter full moon from one respect. And some people say, well, it's even the entry into the equinox of Aries, that is. Now, it's arbitrary to choose a Sunday after this full moon as the moment of Easter. It's simply a convenience. So this whole idea of resurrection, it's not the 7th initiation, although that's what resurrection applies to. It's a rising into an entirely new potential with only 6 years remaining before the great conclave of 2025. So I suggest that, if you wish and can join us, we have many events occurring. And let's see, Joe and BL, where can they find a list of these events? Will it be on Makara if they go there?
Joe,
we're sending out the constant contact email to everyone. Actually, I'm going to send it right now, and then BL posts on the public website, www.moriafederation.com.
Okay, all right. So yes, go to moriafederation.com and you'll see the links and you'll see the times of the events. And I think it can be a very intense time for renewal. There's always, Aries is the birthplace of ideas. And, we have our conference coming up, and we have the year of the New Group of World Servers Festival, from the 21st to the 28th, and we'll have quite a few programs on that as well. This is going to be an intense year. So we might as well get started with some kind of individual resurrection on our own part, some rising to a higher potential, and that's what I suggest is coming up right imminently for the ingress into Aries and the Aries full moon. And DK says a door opens which does not open in any such way at that moment. So let's take advantage of it, and maybe you can be with us. That'd be wonderful. And let's, as a world group, all be meditating together to increase the archetypal potentials that we need to overcome this very evident attack of selfishness upon the governments of the world. So we have to fight back. That's all I can say. As an Aries type, I can tell you that we have to fight back. Okay, Francis, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, that's a great note to end on. So thank you all for attending, and I hope to see you next month. I guess that will be 5 weeks from now. So until then, blessings, and have a great equinox and full moon meditation. So bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, BL.
Thank you, Francis and BL, and Michael, all of you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Francis. Blessings all.